From Grimm's Illustrated Tales of Caution, The Griffin. Original story by Brothers Grimm, translated by Margaret Raine Hunt, modernized and illustrated by Ken Martinet. Once upon a time there was a king, but where he ruled and what he was called I do not know. He had no son, but an only daughter, who had always been ill. No doctor in the land had been able to cure her. Then it was prophesied to the king that his daughter would find her health by eating an apple. So he ordered it to be proclaimed throughout the whole of his kingdom that whoever brought his daughter an apple that restored her health would be granted her hand in marriage and become king. The king's order was shouted throughout his kingdom. This proclamation became known to a peasant who had 3 sons, and he said to the eldest, "Go out into the garden and take a basketful of those beautiful apples with the red cheeks and carry them to the court. Perhaps the king's daughter will be able to find her health with them, and then you will marry her and be king." The lad did so and set out. When he had gone a short way, he met a little old man who asked him what he had in the basket, to which Yuli replied, for so he was named, "Frogs." At this, the little man said, "Well, so shall it be, and remain," and went away. After a long journey, Yuli arrived at the palace and made it known that he had brought apples that would cure the king's daughter if she ate them. This delighted the king immensely. Yuli was to be brought before the king, but when he opened the basket, instead of having apples in it, he had frogs that were still kicking about. The king grew angry and had him driven out of the palace. When he got home, he told his father how it had gone for him. Then the father sent the next son, who was named Same. But all went with him just as it had gone with Yuli. He also met the little old man, who asked what he had in the basket. Same said hog bristles, and the little old man said, "Well, so shall it be, and remain." When Sam got to the king's palace and said he brought apples with which the king's daughter might find her health, the gatekeepers did not want to let him go in. A person who looked like him had already been there and had treated them as if they were fools. Same, however, maintained that he most definitely had apples and he should have a chance to cure the king's daughter. After a while they believed him and led him to the king, but when he uncovered the basket, he had only hog bristles. This enraged the king most terribly, so he had Same whipped out of the palace. When he got home, he told all that had occurred to him, at which point the youngest boy, whose name was Hans, but was always called Stupid Hans, came and asked his father if he might go with some apples to the king. "Oh," said the father, "you would be just the right fellow for such a thing. If the clever ones can't manage it, what can you do?" The boy, however, insisted and said, "Indeed, father, I wish to go." "Just get away, you stupid fool. You must wait till you are wiser," said the father, who turned his back. Hans pulled at the back of his father's smock and said, "I wish to go." "Well then, so far as I am concerned, you may go, but you will soon come home again," replied the old man in a spiteful voice. The boy was tremendously delighted and jumped for joy. "Well, act like a fool. You grow more stupid every day," said the father again. But Hans was not discouraged and did not let it spoil his excitement. But as it was already night, he thought he might as well wait until the morning, for he could not get to the king in time that day. All night long he could not sleep in his bed, and if he did doze for a moment, he dreamt of beautiful maidens, palaces, gold, silver, and all kinds of extraordinary things. Early in the morning he set out on his way, and shortly afterward the little shabby-looking man in icy clothes came to him and asked what he was carrying in the basket. Hans told him he was carrying apples with which the king's daughter would find her health. Then, said the little man, so shall they be and remain. But at the castle, no one would let Hans go in, for the gatekeeper said two had already been there who had told them that they were bringing apples, and one of them had frogs, the other had hog bristles. Hans, however, resolutely maintained that he most certainly had no frogs, but some of the most beautiful apples in the whole kingdom. As he spoke so pleasantly, the doorkeeper thought he could not be telling a lie, and asked him to go in. And he was right, for when Hans uncovered his basket in the king's present, golden yellow apples came tumbling out. The king was delighted and caused some of them to be taken to his daughter, and then waited in anxious expectation until news should be brought to him of the effect they had. But before much time had passed by, the news was brought to him. And who do you think it was who came? It was the daughter herself. As soon as she had eaten of those apples, she was cured and sprang out of her bed. The joy the king felt cannot be described. But now he did not want to give his daughter in marriage to Hans, and said he must first make him a boat that would go quicker on dry land than on water. Hans agreed to the condition and went home and told his family. The father sent Yuli into the forest to make a boat of that kind. He worked diligently and whistled as he worked. At midday, when the sun was at its highest, came the little old man and asked him what he was making. Yuli gave him an answer: wooden bowls for the kitchen. The shabby old man said, so it shall be and remain. By evening, Yuli thought he had now made the boat, but when he wanted to get into it, he had nothing but wooden bowls. The next day, Sam went into the forest, but everything went with him just as it had gone with Yuli. On the third day, stupid Hans went. He worked away most industriously, so that the whole forest resounded with the heavy blows, and all the while he sang and whistled merrily. At midday, when it was the hottest, the little man came again and asked what he was making. A boat which will go quicker on dry land than on water, replied Hans. And when it is done, I am to have the king's daughter for my wife. Well, said the little man, so shall it be and remain. In the evening, when the sun had turned into gold, Hans finished his boat, and all that was needed for it. He got into it and rowed to the palace. The boat went swiftly as the wind. The king saw it from afar, but would not give his daughter to Hans yet, and said he must first take 100 hares out to pasture from early morning until late evening, and if one of them got away, he should not have his daughter. Hans was contented with this, and next day he went with his flock to the pasture and took great care that none of them ran away. Before many hours had passed came a servant from the palace and told Hans that he must give her a hare instantly, for some visitors had come unexpectedly. Hans, however, was very well aware of what that meant and said he would not give her one. The king might want some hare soup for his guest tomorrow, the maid argued. Then Hans said that if the king's daughter came herself, he would give her a hare. The maid relayed this to the palace, and the daughter did go to Hans. In the meantime, the little man came again to Hans and asked him what he was doing there. He said he had to watch over 100 hares and see that none of them ran away, and then he might marry the king's daughter and be king. Good, said the little man. Here is a whistle for you, and if one of them runs away, just whistle it, and then it'll come back again. When the king's daughter came, Hans gave her a hare into her apron. But when she had gone about 100 steps with it, he whistled, and the hare jumped out of the apron, and before she could turn around was back to the flock again. When the evening came, Hans whistled once more, and all of the rabbits came. Hans looked to see if all were there, and then drove them to the palace. The king wondered how Hans had been able to take 100 hares to graze without losing any of them, but he still would not give him his daughter yet, and said he must now bring him a feather from the griffin's tail. Hans set out at once and walked straight forwards. In the evening he came to a castle, and there he asked for a night's lodging, for at the time there were no inns. The lord of the castle invited Hans to stay the night, which gave the lord much pleasure. "Where are you going?" the lord asked Hans. Hans answered, "To the Griffin." "Oh, to the Griffin. They tell me he knows everything, and I have lost the key to an iron money chest. Would you be so kind as to ask him where it is?" "Yes, indeed," said Hans. "I will do that." Early the next morning he went onwards, and on his way arrived at another castle, in which he again stayed the night. When the people who lived there learned that he was going to the Griffin, they said they had a daughter who was ill, and that they had already tried every means to cure her, but none of them had done her any good. And would he be so kind to ask the Griffin what would make their daughter healthy again? Hans said he would willingly do that, and went onwards. Then he came to a lake, and instead of a ferry boat, a tall, tall man was there, who had to carry everyone across. The man asked Hans where he was going. "To the Griffin," said Hans. "Then when you get to him," said the man, "ask him why I am forced to carry everybody over the lake." "Yes, indeed, most certainly I will do that," said Hans. Then the man took him up on his shoulders and carried him across. After a while, Hans arrived at the Griffin's house, but the wife was the only one at home, and not the Griffin himself. Then the woman asked him what he wanted. Then he told her everything, that he had to get a feather out of the Griffin's tail, and that there was a castle where they had lost the key of their money chest, and he was to ask the Griffin where it was, that in another castle the daughter was ill, and he was to learn what would cure her, and then not far from here there was a lake and a man beside it who was forced to carry people across it, and he was very anxious to learn why the man was obliged to do it. Then said the woman, "Look here, my good friend, no Christian can speak to the Griffin. He devours them all. But if you like, you can lie down under his bed, and in the night, when he is quiet, fast asleep, you can reach out and pull a feather out of his tail. And as for those things which you are to learn, I will ask about them myself." Hans was quite satisfied with this and got under the bed. In the evening, the Griffin came home, and as soon as he entered the room, said, "Wife, I smell a Christian." "Yes," said the woman, "one was here today, but he went away again." And on that the Griffin said no more. In the middle of the night, when the Griffin was snoring loudly, Hans reached out and plucked a feather from his tail. The Griffin woke up instantly and said, "Wife, I smell a Christian, and it seems to me that somebody was pulling at my tail." His wife said, "You have certainly been dreaming, and I told you before that a Christian was here today, but that he went away again. He told me all kinds of things, that in one castle they had lost the key to their money chest and could find it nowhere." "Oh, the fool," said the Griffin. "The key lies in the wood house under a log of wood behind the door." And then he said that in another castle the daughter was ill, and only they knew no remedy that would cure her. Oh, the fool, said the Griffin. Under the cellar steps a toad has made its nest of her hair, and if she got her hair back, she would be well. And then he also said there was a place where there was a lake and a man beside it who was forced to carry everybody across. Oh, the fool, said the Griffin. If he only put one man down in the middle, he would never have to carry another across. Early the next morning, the Griffin got up and went out. Then Hans came forth from under the bed, and he had a beautiful feather, and had heard what the Griffin had said about the key, and the daughter, and the man. The Griffin's wife repeated it all once more to him that he might not forget it. And then he went home again. First he came to the man by the lake, who asked him what the Griffin had said. But Hans replied that he must first carry him across, and then he would tell him. So the man carried him across, and when he was over, Hans told him that all he had to do was to set one person down in the middle of the lake, and then he would never have to carry another person. The man was hugely delighted, and told Hans that out of gratitude he would take him once more across, and back again. But Hans said no, he would save him the trouble. He was quite satisfied already, and pursued his way. Then he came to the castle where the daughter was ill. He took her on his shoulders, for she could not walk, and carried her down the cellar steps, and pulled out the toad's nest from beneath the lowest step, and put it in her hand. And she sprang off his shoulders and up the steps before him, and was quite cured. Then the father and mother rejoiced beyond measure, and they gave Hans gifts of gold and of silver, and whatever else he wished for, they also gave him. And when he got to the other castle, he went at once into the woodhouse, and found the key under the log of wood behind the door, and took it to the lord of the castle. He was more than a little pleased, and gave Hans a reward much of the gold that was in the chest, and all kinds of things besides, such as cows, sheep, and goats. When Hans arrived before the king with all these things, with the money and the gold and the silver and the cows, sheep, and goats, the king asked him how he had come by them. Then Hans told him that the Griffin gave everyone whatever he wanted. So the king thought he himself could make use of such things, and set out on his way to the Griffin. But when he got to the lake, it happened that he was the very first who arrived there after Hans. And the man put him down in the middle of it, and went away, and the king was drowned. Hans, however, married the daughter, and became king. The end.